Welcome to Coffee and Samso. I've got Brad Underwood here from Galileo. Brad, maybe the good start is just intro yourself and tell us your story.
Yeah, no problem. So Galileo is an exploration company and I am an exploration geologist. I think it's important to understand geology is a very wide-ranging subject, and so there's various specialties between mining geology, exploration geology, resource geology, database geology. I'm firmly within the exploration geology camp. I've spent the last 18 years as a geologist, and almost all of that time has been exploration geology. When I started my career, the first couple of years, I was lucky enough to work for a company that had both an open cut and an underground mine at the same operation. That was at the Tritton mine in New South Wales. So I got some mining experience, and then after that I've spent the remainder of my career and continue to work in the exploration area. So very much focused on discovering new resources, drilling those resources out, and then progressing them through to mining studies.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, because I've lived in exploration all myself as well, with little to no mining experience, and I enjoy exploration. I think it's one of those facets that is exciting, finding something out of nothing in some ways. Look, Galileo is really interesting to me because I reached out to you. It's one of those companies that inherited the project from Mark Creasy, likes of Legend and the whole Albany Fraser belt that sort of went along its merry way after Nova was discovered. It's relatively new province, you could call it, a nickel province, and then let us know how that journey started.
So in 2010, I started working for Mark Creasy. He's our largest shareholder. He still owns around 26% of the company. So for 8 years, between 2010 and 2018, I was working a lot in the Fraser Range. Even before the discovery of Nova, which was the first economic discovery in the Fraser Range, we're out in that part of the world doing soil sampling and reconnaissance work, building the project up for further drilling programs. So Sirius made their discovery in 2012. That was a Mark Creasy-backed company as well.
Yep.
They were in joint venture with the Creasy Group at the time.
Yep.
So I got to benefit from seeing that discovery made by Sirius with all the joint venture data that was coming in. So at Galileo, we have a huge amount of experience in the Fraser Range because of our history there. Mark Creasy himself first pegged ground in the Fraser Range back in the late 90s. So he also has a huge amount of data. So there's a long history in the Fraser Range from the Creasy Group through into Galileo and myself and our geological team. So two of our geologists came from the Creasy Group as well. So we've all had a long history in the Fraser Range. We understand how to explore there. In 2015, we were lucky enough to make a discovery at the Silver Knight deposit, which is owned by Mark Creasy. And it's a great place to explore. We've seen the value creation with Sirius, with the Legend mining results they've released recently. It's a good area to make discoveries in because the value proposition from any resource that comes out is very strong.
Yeah, my first job was with Great Central Mines, and that's Bronzewing.
Right.
That's Mark Creasy. I believe at one point, I think he may have come into our camp late one night in his four-wheel drive back in those days. In terms of, I've looked at Galileo and what you guys are looking at. The Albany Fraser Range to me appears to me like the sort of the Yamana belt with Gold Road, where they've just taken over the whole province. Mark's pretty well covered that province all up and separate into different entities, I guess. Do you see, obviously you worked in that area for a long time and you would understand it better than most people. You see the continuity of the geologies, the strike, any similarities? Are you seeing different provinces popping up, different styles?
Yes, it is quite complicated. So the Albany Fraser is a geological term for a large, over 1,000 kilometre belt that stretches right around the southern part of Western Australia and then up through the eastern part. The Fraser Range is a sub-portion of that overall belt. and then the prospective parts of the Fraser Range are a smaller portion of that again. So we can tell using geophysical tools, in particular magnetics and gravity, as to which parts of the Fraser Range belt, which remember is a part of the overall Albany-Fraser extensive zone, which part of the Fraser Range is most prospective, and those areas are the ones that we focus on. So I suppose that something else to note is that there have been no discoveries in the Fraser Range that haven't occurred either on Creasy Group joint venture ground or 100% on Creasy ground. So Mark has been there so long and spent a large amount of money in the area, I think the last count over $40 million, that he really has a genuine first mover advantage in understanding the belt. And like I mentioned, there have been no discoveries outside of Creasy Group joint venture ground in the Fraser Range at all. So I think that's a fairly good indication that there has been a very strong understanding of which parts of the belt are most prospective. And it is a smaller area of that 1,000 kilometres.
I mean, I'm looking at your map there in terms of where you guys are and relative to where Nova is and your Silver Knight. Are you seeing that? Are the geology the same, or are they like completely different?
Yeah, so as you get into a smaller scale, there are definite geological similarities. So we're talking just before about the larger scale, the magnetics and gravity. That allows us to target in for drilling programs. And then once you get onto that smaller scale, which is still, say, 5 to 10 kilometres, that type of range, rather than 100 kilometres, that's when the geological similarities in the rocks themselves become apparent. And that's the type of rocks we're chasing. So very particular style of rock that is formed deep below the surface of the Earth, and over the last 1.2 billion years has slowly made its way to the surface. So when you look at those rocks under the microscope, you can see distinct similarities, and that's how we know that we are getting closer. And then ultimately the goal is to find the metals which we can extract and create mines from those resources. So it's a multi-stage approach from the large scale, using large scale data sets, to the smaller scale, using geological understanding, and then targeting right in on those areas which might be worth mining.
I guess it's like looking at the Norseman lunar belt, 1,600 kilometres.
Yeah.
God knows how many mines and different commodities that you got there.
Yeah.
I've always said when you've got such a massive system, the differences is going to be so. It's like looking at the world population, right? How different are we everywhere? Even within the same family, we have 3 kids and they're all different. So in terms of geology, you may have enrichment of one commodity over the other, and the reason why one's got out more than the other. It's that what I like about these kind of things. Obviously, money's been spent, so now we can go and look at a map and go, oh, geez, you got 3 all these deposits. Geez, the endowment must be there, where there's smoke, there's fire, in some respect. In terms of your projects itself, I can see that you can see those grades, 0.3% nickel and things like that. Is there, it's in terms of nickel itself, are you seeing more one style as opposed to the other within your own projects itself already?
Within the Fraser Range, the style of nickel mineralisation is quite consistent. It's a magmatic nickel style. And what that means, it's nickel that has been, it originally starts life as part of a magma deep within the surface of the Earth, but it crystallises without reaching the surface of the Earth. So that means that the deposit itself is formed at depth, anywhere between 4 and 12 kilometres, perhaps deeper, and then it moves over time, it's pushed to the surface of the Earth. So that style of mineralisation is different to the typical style within Western Australia, which is associated with volcanic lava flows. So the nickel mineralisation in the Fraser Range is quite consistent, but is very sparsely distributed. And talking about the population as you did before, and one of the parallels between geology and population, just a general population of people, might be that the cluster effect. So people tend to live in highly dense densely populated areas, and they cluster in specialties. And a similar thing could be said about metal distribution as well. It occurs in clusters, and the type of metal and mineralisation is typically pretty consistent within that cluster. So if we're looking at the Fraser Range as a cluster of potential nickel deposits, then the mineralisation within those nickel deposits is very consistent along strike. And that's one of the great things about what we have so far, is that we know we have the same rock types as the other mineralisation so far discovered in the Fraser Range, and we have the same type of sulfides. So for us, that's a great encouragement to keep looking in that area.
Yep.
It's very rare in the Fraser Range to come across nickel sulfides. To my knowledge, there are only 4 places with the type of sulfide that we have at our Lantern prospect. One is the Nova mine, obviously, the Silvernite deposit, which is owned by Mark Creasy. There's Legend Mining's Norseman Project, and then there's Galileo's Lantern prospect. They're the only 4 known occurrences of nickel mineralisation of the tenor that we are seeing. And tenor is a fairly simple technical term for the amount of nickel within the sulfide itself. So there are such a thing as barren sulfides that don't contain any metal worth extracting. Our tenors are very high, which means that our sulfides contain a good amount of nickel. And if we were able to find more sulfide, we'd expect to see nickel grades which would be approaching economic material.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I'm not, in my time, I haven't worked in the nickel industry. I've learned over the years talking to people like yourself who seem to be enlightening me, like in logarithm scale when we talk. So you're saying that I mean, those 4 projects, is it due to the fact there's a lack of discovery, or is it the fact that the style, the content, the nickel content percentage, and the way the nickel is occurring in your geology, is that unique to those 4 groups, or is it just a lack of discovery that you haven't found, or other people have found similar?
Yeah, there's a lot of exploration work that's been going on, and there has been a number of occurrences of barren sulfides. So in a way, that would be described as a technical success. So for an explorer in the Fraser Range, the first step is to find the right rock types that have the ability to contain sulfides, and then to find the sulfides within those rocks, and then to find the sulfides that actually contain metal within those rocks. Okay. So getting to that end stage, finding some sulfides that have a good content of nickel is quite difficult and rare. And it's the first step towards developing economic intercepts, which would lead on to a resource and eventually into mining if successful. It's just a rare occurrence. That's how it operates. Okay. If we have a look at the Canadian examples, which see a similar strike length belt in the Thompson Nickel Belt, 150 to 200 kilometres long. Yeah. There are over a dozen operating mines there, but they've been working that area for the last 50 years or so. Yep. So in the Fraser Range, we've been operating since 2012, since the discovery there at Nova. Give it another 10 years or so, and I think we'd see more discoveries made within the 150 to 200 kilometre strike length of prospective ground in the Fraser Range. But ultimately, there's probably only going to be 10 or 12 mines. It's still going to be a substantial resource if those discoveries do eventuate. But there's just not a lot of mines. So to have 4 occurrences of nickel mineralisation in the Fraser Range, one of which is linked to an operating mine, another which is a resource, a third is a very good prospect of Legends, and the 4th is our own early stage exploration result. I think that's not unusual.
I mean, I guess, when I saw your presentation, you can comparing to the Canadian ones, and the size that they have, like Voisey Bay and things like that. How is there any distinct difference between your nickel, your mineralization style, as to obviously with the Kambalda stuff, whether it's nickel sulfides or the Komatiite style, and then what else you find along the sort of Norseman Wiluna belt mines? Are there any? Can you plot them on and see them differently?
Yeah, probably the biggest difference between Fraser Range nickel and Komatiite nickel, which has driven the nickel industry in Western Australia for the last 50 years, is the greater presence of copper. So in the Fraser Range, you get both nickel and, to a lesser extent, copper. whereas most of the other nickel mines in Western Australia are predominantly nickel. So there's a higher content of copper. Overall, it's a lower grade, but a much bigger resource.
Okay.
So with the higher grades of nickel found within, say, the Norseman Wiluna belt, you might be approaching 4 to 5% nickel, but much smaller resources of 1 to 2 million tonnes. In the Fraser Range at Nova, they've got around 14 million tonnes, nickel grades over 2%, and copper grades about 1%. So the overall value proposition is, to my mind, higher within the Fraser Range because they're larger scale ore bodies, and they have the byproduct of copper with them.
And they're able to extract the copper out?
Yeah, absolutely. So the extraction rates are very good.
Okay.
The rock is, in geological terms, it's known as high-grade metamorphic rock, which means that because it's formed so deep within the earth where those pressures are so large, the crystal structure is such that it makes extraction relatively easy, and it also makes for good mining conditions. So one of the things about Nova when they were developing the decline there is they're able to develop right to the base of the ore and then start mining backwards. So a lot of that development has been done. And when I was reading IGO's latest quarterly, I see that their cash costs for producing nickel from that mine are some of the lowest in the world.
Okay.
Which makes very profitable ore bodies in the Fraser Range.
Is your mineralisation from surface, or when did they start? In general, I mean.
So it depends on the geometry of any particular ore shoot or ore accumulation that you come across. So for us, our mineralisation starts from about 50 metres below surface, and that's because there's about 50 metres of cover on top. Yeah, so that cover material is sandstone that's been laid down over the last 50 million years, and then beneath that is the target rock that we are chasing.
I guess always, if you don't have that cover, we won't be sitting here talking about things.
That's it. It would have been discovered long ago. So it's because of the cover, and it's the next generation of deposits that we expect to see found and developed within Western Australia will be in those areas that have a little bit of cover on top. It's not prohibitive in terms of mining or exploration, but it means that there has been no exploration done there in the past.
I think in this day and age, that kind of cover is it's actually a good thing because it allows you to talk about it because you've and
a lot of potential up there.
I mean, look, nickel's one of those funny things. It's either shoots or disseminated stuff, and again, it's like high-grade vein as opposed to massive and large-scale volume, lesser grade, high grade, lesser volume. In terms of, I mean, obviously, you guys just recently raised $5 million, and obviously, the market sort of thinks that you're better than average. Are you seeing market liking this kind of story? What is the market sentiment out there? I know it's tough, but what is the sentiment?
For ourselves, I think the sentiment is very strong. There's an expectation that the Fraser Range has yet to yield a number of discoveries, and we've got some very good ground. So when we listed as an IPO a couple of years ago, we were able to take some of the better ground that the Creasy Group had into joint venture, and we've been exploring that. So I think the market recognises the history we've had in the Fraser Range, and our chances of success are weighted accordingly because of the work that we've done, myself and then our geological team, our supporters, Mark Creasy, with the ground that we've got. So the sentiment is quite strong around potential discoveries in the Fraser Range. And then for ourselves in particular, Galileo, knowing that we have good ground gives investors a lot of encouragement.
Yeah, I guess in when Sirius made the discovery, everyone's gone down to Albany Fraser. Everyone was the catchphrase was Albany Fraser. Would I be incorrect in saying there's probably only a few left in that space, and the rest is sort of faltered off? The neurology is sort of...
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and it comes down to what we were talking about before with the large amount of money that the Creasy Group has spent in the past in the Fraser Range and accumulating a very good ground package. So there's been a lot of exploration since the discovery of Nova on those tenements marginal to what I would describe as the Fraser Range proper, and there haven't been any discoveries there. So it has been a drop-off in activity. in those marginal companies.
Yep.
Or those marginal tenements, those areas
yeah.
on the edges with some chance of success, but not as prospective as the central part of the belt. But in the central part of the belt, IGO is spending a lot of money. They've got the Nova mine, and they're spending, I think, around $50 million a year, both in their mine and along strike. Legend Mining's very active, and then there's ourselves. So there are still very active companies out there. And of course, the Creasy Group itself still has 100% owned ground that they are exploring, but it's a private company, so they're not obliged to disclose anything to the public.
Now, in terms of, I guess, one of the things that with nickel, well, correct me if I'm wrong here, is geophysics play a big part in how you discover things. Is that still true in terms of exploration methods?
It's not the be-all and end-all, but it absolutely helps. So to begin with, having those base level magnetic and gravity data sets, which allow us to reduce our search area to the areas that are most prospective, that's critical. And then to go from those, from a large ground holding to the areas that have some potential, then we use drilling techniques. We've got to understand the geology after that. So the geophysics brings us into the area, then the geology tells us what's prospective, and then we start looking at finer scale geophysical surveys such as electromagnetic or induced polarization. They're electrical techniques which benefit from the fact that most nickel sulfides have an electrical response, and then that draws us in for targeting further. So geophysics plays a big part, but the geology, the understanding of the rocks is really what brings us to make discoveries.
Okay. Anyway, just for those that think this is fake news, it's not, because we're not allowed to have coffee, not even allowed to have cups, but Veronica from Mill Point Cafe has been very generous to allow us to have our coffee with Samso still here without the coffee. I just thought I'd let people know, because the last time we were accused of fake news because we didn't have coffee on the table.
You're right. I've had 2 coffees this morning already. Trust me, I'm loaded.
Look, in terms of where does Galileo go from here? You raise the money, you've got the nice results, ongoing exploration. What is the path forward?
For us is to try and make a resource discovery. So we've got a good indication of mineralization. We've got mineralization essentially. It's disseminated up to about 0.7% nickel and copper over a metre. So it's enough to tell us that we have a mineralized system. That system ought to be capable of containing an accumulation of nickel, which is Mirth mining. So for us is to go out and find where that might be. So that means more drilling, which we're undertaking at the moment. We're currently running an air core drilling program of around 8,000 to 10,000 metres. That'll give us a first pass test undercover, and then we'll come back and do more deeper drilling after we've completed that. So we're utilising the money to do more drilling programs, which more drilling means more chances of success, and success is what we're after.
Yeah. I guess, exploration is all about dollars in the ground, the drilling, not finding, and then I guess, most people that in this game will know that Mark has most of the good ground. I think and it's not just talk, because it's proven by the fact that Sirius and what they found in the Fraser Range there. Do you see, what's your opinion of the nickel price before, now, and going forward? What's the trend? What's your vision?
It's
your crystal ball vision.
That's a big question. Internationally, if we're talking about the nickel price in US dollars, I think the long-term average is around $15,000 a tonne. So for the last few years, we've seen nickel prices much below that. The peaks of nickel are much above $15,000 a tonne. So we've seen nickel hobbled over the past few years well below the long-term average. It bounced up to around $14,000 or $15,000, and investors start to get excited at that level. But that's really just a long-term average. I think if there was a genuine increase in demand in nickel, which there appears to be happening, or there's a supply shortage, the price of nickel could double. and that wouldn't be surprising in historical terms. But it's been quite some time since that last happened, so I think a lot of investors have forgotten that volatility in nickel works both ways. And over the recent history, last 5 years, we've had volatility on the downside, and the nickel price has been very low. But it could easily go the other way and explode. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And so that's in US dollar terms. In Australian dollar terms, the nickel price is quite good because the US exchange rate has been favouring exporters.
Yeah. I think that's one of the big pluses for the gold prices, the Aussie dollar,
Absolutely.
where it sits. I think that's true to most commodities. And I think going forward in the next 12 months, 24 months, nobody knows what the new world's going to be, but at least your projects are in Australia, so tackling that's probably a lot easier than if you were overseas, I guess.
Yeah, we've chosen West Australia as a good jurisdiction to work within. We're not interested in exploring in other parts of the world, so for us, our expertise is in exploration. Sovereign risk is something we're not willing to take on, and we're probably even more parochial than that. We like West Australia. We're not even interested in going outside of the state. We think there's a huge amount of potential in Western Australia. I think the lack of exploration success is not really a true description of the potential that still exists here.
Yeah.
And I think with the funds put into the right hands, that there are many more discoveries to be made in Western Australia, and that our mining industry will continue to be strong as those discoveries are made.
In terms of I mean, going back to geology again, like you've got some samples of rock types that of specimens. In terms of, like, is there a specky section that got you guys excited? Was there a let's all get excited moment for you guys in a discovery?
We're professional explorers, so we
You don't get excited.
we get a little bit excited, but for us, that's our jobs, right? So
Yeah.
we don't get carried away. We just keep running with the same programs, seeing them through to the end and making discoveries. So we've made discoveries in the past. I know a lot of investors get very excited, but for us, we're professionals. It's our jobs, right? And as part of our jobs, we've had some discoveries which haven't panned out into mines, and then other discoveries that have. So it takes a long time to really understand the potential of a project. So we like what we see, but we're certainly, we don't lose a grip on reality. We just keep going, doing what we're doing, drilling it out, focusing methodically, and very importantly, making sure that the funds are utilised efficiently so that we can increase our chances of drilling out and making a resource discovery.
It's funny you said that, because I get that question asked many times. Is that, is that good? No, is that good? What does that mean? And you're going, well, it's good sign, but as you said, most times it just doesn't pan out, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I was expecting, like that discovery moment, it's like the Sirius story, that last hole, and they got that.
Yeah. I think those stories are great in hindsight, but at the time you're just doing your job.
Yeah, you wouldn't have known. I mean,
yeah, exactly. The stories come out later.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's so true. That's so true. All right, Brad. Thank you. It's fantastic. It's good to actually hear the actual geology, the exploration story about what is happening at the Albany Fraser. Everyone just throws that word out and everyone talks about it. I've always been intrigued. Obviously, Mark Bennett talked about the discovery of everything, but I've always wanted to find out exactly that, how it is and what's happening there, because it's a long, long way away, and then we don't hear much about it. But thank you for sharing, and maybe we'll get an update next time you find a discovery, and I'll try and make you get excited.
Sounds good. I'll be a lot more excited if we get a few discovery holes in the ground.
Okay.
But ultimately, we're there to drill out a resource and see it through to feasibility studies. So, we're in it for the long term.
All right. Thank you. We can't shake, but we can say thank you, and
Great.
till next time.
Yep, we'll do.
All right.